Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be this fine day. We are coming to you with another conversations on retail focused on on-shelf availability. And I have the pleasure of talking to Glenn Richey. I guess your official name is Robert Glenn Richey Jr., right? So we'll have to unpack that one a little bit because that's like 18 first names, but that's okay. We'll get into that here
Yes.
in a second. But Glenn, why don't you go ahead and you're unmuted. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of background of how you came to get into the supply chain area.
Kind of an interesting thing. I think it's like most people, Mike. It's I didn't find supply chain; it found me. It's kind of the way those things happen. Yeah. So I'm Glenn Richey. I don't go by Robert only because that was my father's name and now my son's name. The Scottish heritage. I guess we're not very creative. We use a lot of first names. Uh, Actually, these are last names. All of my first name looking names are last names from that part of the world. So I got into supply chain management after undergrad, like a lot of people do. I thought I was going to be in a sales career somewhere. My family kind of had a tradition and history of being in those types of jobs. And it was a time period in the early 90s when things were pretty rocky in sales and the economy was doing some different things. And I was in a management training program after doing some work in co-ops in manufacturing. And I was just sure I was going to end up out of that program in sales and ended up in purchasing, right? So,
Oh, the other side of the desk.
yeah, exactly. Which was kind of a shock, right? But what was a great experience. Genuine Parts Company, SP Richards Company, put me through the paces for about 9 years in the wholesaling realm, where we did a lot of retail consulting with small to mid-sized retailers. Also did some fill-in supply for major players like those folks up in Bentonville.
Mhm.
That's kind of where my history took me. So happy that it did. It's been a fantastic career to be in. Now, I might not have said that in 2020 during the COVID disruption crisis, but I mean, supply chain managers, their job is to try to fix those types of problems. So we had some of those revealed at the time.
Nice. Actually, it's funny that you say that because I do a lot of guest speaking at the University of Arkansas supply chain with Matt Waller and Brent Williams and Donnie and all those folks. And I usually have the first question is like, how many of you ever heard of supply chain before 2020? Like
Yeah.
five people raised their hands, right? And most of them are supply chain career path people. If there's anything that good that came out of COVID, everybody understands supply chain is important.
Yeah. I
That's
know
about
that's
the
very
only
true.
thing that came out of that. But there was a whole realization that said, hey, supply chain is important and we take it for granted. And there's opportunities in the supply chain area. So I'm not sure that you guys put that together as a recruiting video, but it did certainly drive a lot of interest of people who've gone from what the heck is supply chain to, wow, it's really important because there are containers in the middle of the ship that can't get unloaded. And man, we got to figure out this stuff. So, in some respects, it may be a blessing in disguise. I mean, I would never want to say a global pandemic is a blessing for sure, but it did help people realize the importance of supply chain, right?
I think that's totally true. And, it also showed us some of our weaknesses and those types of things, global displacement and the kind of the distances. And, some of the type products that are difficult to get. Pharmaceuticals come to mind as one of those areas that was really problematic and maybe not talked about as much as it probably should have been. So, yeah,
Mhm.
Mike, on a normal day, I don't get a call asked to speak to Congress, but that does happen after we screw up the supply chains globally for a couple of years. So, and I will say that one of my comments to them, and one of my very first comments to them, similar to what you're saying, is to tell them that there is no the supply chain, right? This is a massive network and web of different organizations that come together to get the product where it needs to be. And if it was the supply chain, the two of us could fix it. But that's
Mhm.
the problem is that
Great
it's
perspective. Great perspective.
not
Well,
multiple.
let's unpack a little bit about you. And I told you I was going to ask this question because this is really a trick question if I don't. So you have been part of the supply chain and obviously part of Auburn University for a while. You've got a lot of associates and colleagues and family, et cetera. Tell one thing about yourself that maybe a lot of people don't know. I think this would be interesting.
Okay, well, yeah. So I worked at a number of universities now. A couple of them have pretty good football teams, right? So that makes for a kind of interesting transition when you move from Oklahoma to Alabama to Auburn,
Yeah.
which I think some people would call me, Benedict Auburn, for that move from Alabama to Auburn. But sports are a big thing on university campuses, and I've been involved to some degree or the other. Probably most of my colleagues don't know that I started my college career at South Alabama as a soccer player. I don't look like that today.
Soccer.
I was a goalkeeper at the University of South Alabama to start my career. But there's a bit of irony there, because when I ended up at the University of Alabama a couple of years after being on staff there, a guy named Nick Saban asked if I would be able to step in and maybe do some recruiting for the football program at Alabama. So I'm a former college soccer player who did recruiting for football at the rival school from where I work today. Auburn
Oh
University.
my gosh. All right. So when for those of you who don't know, you want to talk about a rivalry, Alabama versus Auburn is one of the most noted. What side of the field do you sit on, Mr. Richey?
I mean, I always love to root for Auburn, but sometimes when it comes point to point, you got to stay with the people that brought you there. My undergraduate degree is from the University of Alabama. So yeah. And then you got to have Oklahoma in there too. It's very confusing for me and for a lot of people here too.
Fascinating. Well, that's awesome. What a great soundbite. Well, we're going to get into supply chain. Supply chain is really the purpose of the topic here, but I love to ask this question every time I talk to somebody, because in terms of being a supply chain professional, you're also a customer. You go into stores every single day to buy things you want. I spend a lot of time in Home Depot and Lowe's because I'm just kind of like that kind of stuff. And there have been times where I have looked for a specific wrench or a specific part for a specific project, and they don't have it. And I've told those stories multiple times of how frustrating that is from a customer experience. So walk us through. I'm sure you've had an experience over the last 6 to 12 months where you went into a store expecting to pick something up and you were disappointed. Please don't say who it was.
Okay.
We don't need that. We don't need that whole thing. You can just, if it was a big box retailer that does do it yourself, you can say one of those big box retailers is fine.
Yeah.
As much as you could tell us, because you're a customer as well, I'd love to hear your side of the being disappointed at the store shelf.
Well, all of the supply chain work we do, whether it's research or teaching these days, it all starts with the customer, and the old days of shoving it down people's throats just doesn't work, and it puts companies in a really poor financial position. So when I'm probably hypercritical about this stuff, Mike, because I go in and go, where's the damn stuff? It ought to be here. And as a guy that spent a good bit of his career in wholesaling, on-shelf availability is key for us. We are the ones expected to make sure that the product's there. So I'm talking about 99.9, 99.6% inventory accuracy and availability at all time. And those were the old standards. And so when I walk into the retail venue where I used to do a lot of consulting and can't find whatever it is, I do get upset. And I also know from the research that that's the trigger point where people decide to buy elsewhere. And so if you're running that brick and mortar facility, like you were just talking about, whether it be this do-it-yourself or that do-it-yourself, if the product's not at one and you find it at the other, you're pretty much destined to go back to that store where you found the product the last time. And that means the store that had the basket of product has lost all of those orders from that customer. And we all know the cost of trying to reconvert customers. My issues, and the ones that I run into, tend to happen in the grocery business more than anywhere else. It's a place that I think most of us go to weekly, or at least every couple of weeks. Some of us go every couple of days. And I've done a lot of supply chain finance teaching in the grocery food business. So I'm the one that does most of the shopping in this family. And when the product's not there, you're irritated, especially when it's some of these companies that specialize in organic products or specific health-oriented things that you're going. And if they don't have it, the only other place to take a look is online, right? And so you make that tradition to see if it's online. The brick and mortar store works kind of as a showroom, which is not what they want to do. And probably the worst of all is that, all of the quality that we add from the supply chain really deals with demand and supply balance.
Right.
And you can never get to the demand and supply balance if you don't know what you didn't sell. So during my comprehensive exams in my PhD program at Oklahoma, the dean slipped a little question into my oral exams that I didn't know it was him. Dean Rodney Evans, great guy, super mentor. And the thing just said, how do you account for lost sales in a grocery setting due to poor inventory accuracy? And I wrote this thing, Mike, this must have been 7 or 8 pages thing. And the answer to the question was you can't, right? Okay. And so I spelled this out in the oral thing and everything. And Dean Evans looked at me and said, do you believe that shit? So that's kind of, the real life practical type of professor I had to become after that discussion. And you don't, right? So if that bottle of kombucha that was hot last week doesn't get sold, doesn't end up on the shelf, then who knows how many you missed. And so what do? Do you extrapolate and go long and hope you're right that you missed a bunch of sales? Because unless the customer comes up to the front desk, you just don't know.
Right. Right.
So, we went through a period in the 90s where it seemed like everybody was going to low inventory, closer at the retail impact, to have fewer items on the shelf, a little tighter type inventory, and rely on the suppliers to fill quickly. And I think we found, during the COVID crisis that we weren't as streamlined and healthy as we thought we were, which puts the retailers at extreme risk, right? So, so that's the kind of crazy stuff that goes through my head when my favorite bottle of kombucha is not on the shelf at the grocery store. Right?
So unpack that one. I'm gonna double dig. Okay, so that I don't even know what kombucha is. I guess that's is that a sauce or a liquor?
It's a drink. It's a drink. Yeah.
Thank you. Kombucha.
Probiotic drink. Yeah.
It must be an Auburn thing. Don't know what that is. We don't drink that here in Arkansas. That's all I can tell you. I don't even know what it is. But all right, so it's not there. What do you do?
Yeah. So, the first choice is, do you swap to another brand?
Okay.
And, I picked that category because the brands are very different. There's a lot of loyalty specifically to the different products in that category. And so if it's not there, this is a consumable that you really can't buy on the internet, right? It's a refrigerated product. And so you're going to go somewhere else to try to find it. And the customer, if they can't find it, becomes completely frustrated, and it leaves, a stain on the business, right? So, the other thing that potentially could happen is now that I've come in on Wednesday and it's not there, and I come back in the next Sunday, let's say Saturday, Sunday, and I see that it's there, then maybe I overbuy, right? Maybe I buy too much, and so now you're not going to see me for a couple of weeks on that item. And you also don't know how to forecast for what the next several weeks will be while I'm not buying and other people may or may not be. So if it's not there, lots of bad things happen.
Got it. I want to double click on something you just said here. And I think as I think through it, and again, I am not a academic trained professional. I would love to. I'm a Glenn Richey wannabe or a Matt Waller wannabe kind of day. But when I simple mind, I kind of think of if the store needs product, okay? Well, first off, just because it's in the store doesn't mean it's on the shelf. And so there's a whole, I may have 27 cases of it sitting in the back room, but they're not on the sales floor. You might as well be out of stock.
That's right.
Because the kiss of death is asking an associate to go, well, let me go back in the back room and check. Oh, I ain't waiting for this. This could take forever, right? But the triggers to deliver product to the store, if it's kind of a replenishment process, is threefold. 3 pieces of very simple data that I think of. Number 1, how many do I have? Right? Number 2, how many do I think I'll sell today? That's kind of the forecast.
Sure.
And the third one is if I order it today, how long before I get it?
Right.
So I'm sure there's 500 other ones you would say, but let's just say that those are the 3. Talk to us a little bit. You said inventory accuracy, and you and I were working on some stuff prior to this call that unfortunately got put on hold right now, but it was trying to measure the impact of inventory accuracy to sales. Talk to us about the impacts of things like, okay, Grant, if those are the three, how much do I have? How much am I going to sell? And when I'm going to get it? I would think when I'm going to get it is probably the most reliable. What are the challenges of trying to get a accurate sales forecast and an accurate on hand?
I mean, that's you and I both know that's a crazy question, right? Because there's so many things at play. And you know, when you think back, when I think back to the late '80s, the early '90s, still had a lot of specialty shops, right? You mentioned some hardware stores earlier. Lots of those were small hardware stores, small office product stores, and the owner could walk through in the afternoon and go, need this, need that, need this, need that. And the refill would typically be overnight, which was a really nice situation. Now you've got these stores that have 200,000 square foot, and who knows how many SKUs, continually in flux, growing and shrinking and doing like the accordion to try to figure out what the right mix is. And so as we add and make those things more complex, we end up in a situation where it's more likely that we're going to have missed sales. And so, you kind of put that in your hat. I remember some of these hypermarket type stores trying to do home delivery or, direct pickup and finding out that the customer ordered 10 items and only 7 are in stock. And even though it looked like the items were in stock, well, those blue t-shirts were actually all extra small or something like that. So those needs and consistencies and the customer wanted was not there. So, I mean, all of those things have to come together. Mike, they got to be synchronized. You need to have a good business partner that can be with you on the forecasting and say, kind of know your actions, know your activities. And, all the tech that we use is very important, but there's also managerial decision-making that comes within those forecasts. And we got to have people there, high people involvement to make those types of decisions. Otherwise, somebody comes in and makes a big order. It's a one-time thing. We repeat it. And now we have money tied up in something we can't sell, which is the other side of kind of this discussion.
Great point. Well, so how does somebody from a procurement, buying, potential selling role suddenly flip the script and go into the supply chain? What was it about the supply chain that intrigued you to go and get a degree and then basically spend most of your professional life focusing on the supply chain?
Yeah, it's been, most of my life has been tied towards it. I mean, I was lucky enough, I guess, to get tied with Genuine Parts Company, which is an outstanding distribution business, very, very cost focused, and very, very service quality oriented. So a good portion of my training came, from that experience with that company that kind of opened my eyes to these crazy distribution networks, all the relationships between business to business marketing, business to business management. And I could also see, I guess, at the time that the world was changing, that the information tech was becoming much stronger. People were starting to move more towards e-commerce. Not that they were even there, but certainly they were moving towards e-commerce when I started to get involved in this. And on the finance side of things, people were saying, we're cutting out the middleman. We're going to get rid of wholesalers. This is how we're going to save money. But the reality of the supply chain network was there's no way that could happen because there were too many customers at the end, right? So you can have major manufacturers deliver to, a major retailer, but you probably can't have major manufacturers deliver every customer, right? And so kind of saw that activity going on, the rise of third-party players, and got really interested in it. And, then sometime along the way, I decided I'd leave the real world and study it from the other side, right? And so, nice. I mean, I think it's a dynamic field. It's always changing. And, as somebody that started this thing out as a goalkeeper, you're trying to keep all the balls out of the net, but in play. And at least, have your head on a swivel so you can see what the next disruption is, what the next problem is.
Awesome. Well, this particular channel, and frankly, a lot of what I do is all focused on shelf availability. And people are like, well, supply chain and on-shelf availability are the same thing. Well, no, they're not. Because I would argue you can have a very perfect setup supply chain that delivers product to a store, but because of operational challenges, it's not where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to exclude those for a second.
Yeah.
But as we think about on-shelf availability, the supply chain, And I don't know if you've ever seen this video. I saw it a few times. I've given it in classes, which is how a number two pencil is made. Have you ever seen this? And it's got 40,000 people working together and trying to figure out, it got rubber from here and metal from here and lead from here. And you go, how do we have any pencils at all? I mean, it's like just so complicated, but that's a small fraction of the complexity of the supply chain. So what is a supply chain? How, as I think about all the different ways that customers can buy, omni-channel, brick and mortar, combination of pickup and BOPIS and ROPIS and all those other kinds of real things with which is buy online, pick up in store, and then doing research. What role does the supply chain play in making sure that product's available for the customer, no matter where, however they want it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we have, forecasting techniques that involve cooperating with a lot of different players, right? And I think that's really key, is to have, and we call it collaborative planning for forecasting and replenishment, right? When in supply chain, we can make an acronym out of anything. So CPFR is what we talk about there. And people treat it as a real kind of strong specific program. But if you can think about it, you get the heads together across the different levels, what the manufacturer is able to do, what the distribution network is able to deliver in the amount of time that's available. And of course, there are lots of different options, and then what the needs are at the end. So, I mean, you need the retailer to be able to predict what they think the sales will be so that the manufacturer can get all of those different lines of product in place. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that funnel, you just talked about that pencil, and all the interconnections for that pencil all come back to what the customer does on the end, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really the customer that triggers that work. But in order for the product to be on the shelf, that work's got to be in process before the forecast is even made, right?
Yep.
So those things need to be ongoing, updated, good contact. I mean, there are great companies out there, that are doing this type of thing. I know that my son will actually be in Bentonville for a couple of months this summer, actually working with our RFID lab for Walmart. So Walmart RFID lab.
Really?
Some interesting stuff. Yeah. So maybe
I need to look them up. I've spent a few years, I think 22, working on RFID for Walmart. So what's he going to be doing up there?
I'm not 100% sure. Maybe some of it's incognito, but
that's true. That's true.
It's all about getting the different technologies in place so they can support decision making. And Walmart's fantastic at that. That's certainly what they're known for.
But I can tell you, he's gonna have you calling the hogs from Auburn when you do that.
I've already got enough programs I got to root for right now, Mike. Don't do that.
I think we need to add another one, because I still haven't. I mean, now I'm going to really go off tangent. Is your mascot a tiger or an eagle?
Oh, here down here,
yeah. Which one is it? Pick one.
That's right. I mean,
which one is it? We have a razorback. Now, I don't know what a razorback means, but a razorback hog is our mascot. We have one. You're the only university I know that has two.
Yeah, I will tell you that I plugged in some of this stuff into one of the AI things and was like, okay, why is Auburn's mascot a tiger? This is probably 6 months ago. Yeah. And part of the AI spit out was that it's related to the number of tigers that are in the Alabama and Georgia region, which obviously is not true, but it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. More is better. I don't know. So.
I love it. All right. Well, so talk to us. We basically feels like we're on the other side of the global pandemic. But as I kind of set up before, the global pandemic was horrible in a lot of different ways. A lot of people passed away, and a lot of people were just absolutely scared to death, and all kinds of supply chain challenges too. But it did make people aware of this thing called the supply chain. So are we out of that now? Are we back to whatever normal looks like? That's kind of like 4 years later. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like it depends on the product line, right? We've seen some products, heavy manufacturing, that kind of thing, really move and adjust and try to be better in terms of responsiveness. And then we see some others that have kind of gone back to business as usual, hoping that things go back to business as usual. When I think about this, and this is a part of my research agenda, is that I feel like we underestimated risk, which is quite obvious, and all of this chase toward optimization of pricing. Mm. So you start looking for partners regardless of where they are in the world, regardless of the political risk, regardless of the economic risk, and try to come up with a low landed cost coming from wherever to, and so a lot of that drove us to suppliers in China. They have, good quality support from labor. They can make some good products. I know early in manufacturing for China, they were making Christmas tree lights, right? If you think of a thing that upsets customers, when you lose one of those lights, you get upset. And so nowadays they're producing all kinds of things, right, that customers love. But that stretched us, right? It stretched us to a position where if their government makes a decision, it impacts all of our different supply chains that run through there. Not to mention the other things that we saw, health-related issues. They're having some labor-related issues now. So in all honesty, we need to do reshoring and find better backups and alternatives. Now, Mike, you may remember, in the early 90s, we were on a 3-call at least system with most of our suppliers. You had an A customer out there that would fill 75 to 80% of your stuff. You'd have a 50 to 20, right, with a B customer, a supplier, sorry. And then, then you'd have somebody at the bottom that's getting 3 to 5%. And it's healthy competition to want to move up that ladder. And your systems are all in place so that if one of those messes up, you can flip the switch and bring more in from the other. Now, obviously, there's contracting, there's capacity issues and that type of thing, but it at least gives us some level of support. So we've got to see more movement to that. The bad news for Western countries is that the Chinese businessmen realized this quite some time ago, probably a couple of 5-year plans ago. So I think we may have even talked that I spend some time in Africa every summer working with researchers and to help with supply chains in Central Africa. I go down to the breakfast each morning and there'll be, heavy duty, high quality business people from China in there talking to several different local Africans at each table. So it might be 5-on-1 here, 5-on-1 there, looking for opportunities to spring up businesses in locations that are nearshoring to places like the United States and Europe. So that's an area I think that Western countries need to be more involved, especially the United States and certainly in Latin America. And if we really want to see that move away from the disruption we ended up in, we need to become more responsive, right? We need to be thinking about flexibility, adaptability, agility, and improvising when we need to. Those are the things where the focus needs to be, not consistent optimization of our costs. And so I think we'll figure that out. Brian Gibson and I have written a few things for Accenture that I think are helping train some purchasing agents to think a little bit more broadly along those lines. And of course, then there are all kinds of other issues that come into play, like regulation, sustainability, and those types of things that we'll have to see. But I don't think we're out of it until the network's been redrawn. And then after the network's redrawn, it has to continually be adjusted, right?
So I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but if 2025, we have another global pandemic, are we in a better position than we were in 2020? Or are we still in the same?
I mean, I think we're in a better position largely because strategically decision makers and supply chains have had to go out and look and see what the options are. Now, whether they've made the change or whether they've been able to build infrastructure into a new place to source product, or how about a new issue in terms of labor, actually training these people up so they can do the work in these parts of the world where we really don't always get product are huge, important issues. So,